The state dinner hummed with the low frequency of power. Music, a string quartet playing something unobtrusive and classical, was a thin veneer over the murmur of whispered negotiations and brittle laughter. Julian, senior advisor to the president, watched the man at the head of the long mahogany table. Leo, the youngest president in a century, sat with a ramrod-straight posture that belied the immense pressure on his shoulders. From Julian's position, he could trace the sharp, elegant line of the president's jaw. The boy he had mentored was gone, replaced by a man whose hands, lifting a crystal glass of water, were now lean and decisive. As if sensing the weight of Julian's gaze, Leo's eyes flickered toward him for a fraction of a second as he drank. A ghost of a smile touched Julian's lips. He raised his own glass, shielding the expression as he took a sip of wine. Perhaps it was the vintage or the stifling, perfumed air of the banquet hall, but a sudden dryness seized his throat. Leo's lips, moist from the glass, parted slightly. A flicker of his tongue darted out to catch a stray drop of water. Julian swallowed the wine in his mouth, the action suddenly deliberate, and looked up to find Leo's eyes fixed directly on him. Outside, the cool night air of the rose garden was a shock against his face. He hadn't realized how hot his skin had become. That last look from Leo had been devoid of overt emotion, yet deep within it, a shrewd, knowing glint had unsettled him. He dismissed the rising warmth in his veins, only then noticing the junior aide waiting for him. Julian had only mentioned needing some air, giving no destination, but the young woman was clearly leading him with purpose. He followed without protest, his own footsteps unervingly steady even as a strange heat began to coil in his gut. She led him to a secluded study in the East Wing. As she opened the door, she suggested that the advisor looked tired and could rest here. He was about to step inside when a muffled sound came from behind him. The aide crumpled to the ground. An arm snaked around his neck, pulling him back against a hard chest. The familiar, subtle scent of cedar and bergamot Leo's cologne flooded his senses. The suppressed heat inside him surged back, a punishing wave of fire. A low voice murmured a question by his ear, asking if he truly wanted to go in there. The words were a soft inquiry, but the cold, hard edge of a steel letter opener pressed against his throat conveyed a very different message. It dared him to try. The threat was meaningless. Julian reached up, his hand closing over the one at his throat. In the moonlight filtering through a nearby window, the president's hand was pale and elegant, the knuckles distinct. Julian had stared at those hands for a long time tonight. He brought the hand to his mouth and bit down, not hard but firmly, on the tip of one finger. He felt the tremor that shot through the body behind him, heard the sharp intake of breath. He held on, pulling the young president with him into the waiting room. The air inside was thick with an unfamiliar, heavy perfume. Julian wasn't surprised. It was what he'd expected. But Leo frowned, his eyes darkening with a flash of anger as he looked at Julian. He began to speak, his voice a low growl, but before the first word was fully formed, Julian silenced him, his mouth covering Leo's. The president's body went slack against his. In the president's private residence, heavy curtains blocked out the dawn. Leo was asleep, sprawled across Julian's chest. His pale skin was a canvas of faint red marks. With his eyes closed and his breathing soft and even, he looked impossibly young. The moment felt like an echo from the past, from a time when Julian would be working late on briefs for Leo's father. And a much smaller Leo would wait for him, eventually falling asleep with his head on Julian's lap. When Julian would finally lift him to carry him to bed, the boy's cheek would be creased with red marks from the fabric of his trousers. Gently, Julian shifted Leo's head. Even on the high thread count sheets, a faint line was visible on his cheek. A deep, aching tenderness filled Julian's chest. Some things never changed. He closed his eyes, holding Leo, stealing another hour before the nation would demand their president. Leo woke to a feeling of breathlessness. He opened his eyes to find Julian kissing him. A flicker of irritation at being woken crossed his face, but he yielded, responding with a sleepy compliance. Julian chuckled softly, murmuring how good he was. The quiet of the residence was broken by the discreet buzz of an intercom. The main door to the residence opened, and in the dim light, a figure was seen stumbling out. The Secret Service agents on duty averted their gazes. Julian steadied himself, clearing his throat, but before he could speak, the door opened again. Leo stood there, clad only in a white t-shirt and pajama pants, his frame looking slender and solitary against the warm glow of the room's lamps. The bruises on his neck added a stark, carnal quality to his otherwise austere presence. Julian's eyes were drawn to Leo's lips, still swollen and glistening. Leo noticed his stare, and his cool gaze sharpened into a glare. His voice, rough with sleep, was dangerously quiet as he stated that the advisor had a lot of nerve. Julian's lips curved into a small, tired smile. He wondered if that look meant Leo was ready for a repeat performance. The nearby agents seemed to shrink into the wallpaper. Annoyed by the silent laughter in Julian's eyes, Leo kicked out. Julian caught his leg, using the momentum to pivot and press him back against the doorframe, his hand gripping Leo's thigh. He leaned in close, telling him that the president was a national treasure, and of course he was fond of him. He saw, with satisfaction, the tips of Leo's ears turn a deep red. Flustered, Leo shoved him away and slammed the door. A moment later, it opened again just enough for a dark suit jacket to be tossed out onto the floor. Leo's voice came through the wood, flat and cold. He told Julian that since he was already sleeping his way to the top, maybe he should just take the presidency too. Julian met the cold, unwavering gaze through the crack in the door and swallowed the sharp retort that rose in his throat. Yelling at him now would only make things worse. He stooped to pick up the jacket, noting the dark circles under Leo's eyes. A pang of guilt struck him. Last night had been his doing, his intensity. He stepped closer to the door, pitching his voice low for only Leo to hear. He admitted that last night was his fault and asked him not to be angry. There was no reply. Leo simply stated that he was unwell and that the morning intelligence briefing would be handled by Julian. The door clicked shut. Julian sighed. The head of the presidential detail approached him cautiously, informing him that the morning briefing was about to start and that they had a room prepared for him to change. Julian nodded and told the man to lead the way. He handed the agent Leo's jacket, adding that the president was in a foul mood and they should be careful. After the briefing, which no one questioned him leading, Julian found his own head of security. He ordered the man to find out who had put something in his drink the night before. Just then, a severe-looking woman with a familiar face approached. It was Ms. Albright, Chief of Staff for Eleanor Vance, the powerful former First Lady and Leo's stepmother. She informed him that Mrs. Vance requested his presence. Eleanor's Georgetown townhome was a museum of political influence. She was seated in a high-backed chair, a teacup in her hand, when Julian was shown in. He offered a respectful nod. He was not invited to sit. She took a slow sip of tea, her eyes fixed on a point over his shoulder, and asked if he had slept well. He straightened, his gaze direct. He replied that the accommodations in the White House were excellent, so he had slept soundly. The teacup shattered against the marble fireplace. Her staff flinched. Julian simply watched the woman's fury. Her eyes were a mixture of rage and something else. Fear. She was looking at a man who stood before her, unbowed, meeting her anger with an unnerving calm. She composed herself, her hands folding in her lap. She remarked that he was being incredibly brazen, and wondered if he had no fear of public opinion. He took the liberty of sitting in a nearby armchair. He told her that what people thought depended entirely on the narrative she chose to spin. His investigator returned later that day. The report was startling. The extra potency in his drink hadn't come from one source, but two. The first was easily traced to a network of political operatives loyal to Eleanor. The second trail, however, was faint, deliberately obscured, but ultimately led back to a trusted member of the president's own kitchen staff. A slow smile spread across Julian's face. Eleanor's involvement he'd suspected. But Leo, the clever, brilliant boy, he must have known Julian would investigate. The trail wasn't a mistake. It was a message. It was a confession. It wasn't just Julian who coveted him. Their desires had, coincidentally, aligned. The aide Eleanor had used, he recalled, was the daughter of Secretary Albright, a niece of Eleanor's chief of staff. Eleanor had been trying to set a honey trap to bind him to her faction. A foolish miscalculation. He remembered the first time he saw Leo. A brutal winter. A frantic, loyal aide from the White House had appeared at Julian's father's door. A small boy wrapped in a blanket, burning with fever. Leo's father, the former president, had known the dangers his son faced. Political rivals were circling. In the aftermath of a manufactured scandal that had cost Leo's mother her reputation and her life, the president sent his only son to the one man he trusted, Julian's father, a respected statesman. Officially, the president's son was sent to a private boarding school abroad for his safety. In reality, he grew up in Julian's shadow. Julian walked down a familiar street in Georgetown, stopping at a small French bakery to buy the macarons Leo had loved as a boy, when had his protective affection curdled into this sharp, consuming desire. He couldn't pinpoint the moment. It had simply grown with Leo, becoming an undeniable part of him. He was waved through the White House security gates. The new faces among the Secret Service detail did not go unnoticed. He found Leo in the solarium, reclining on a chaise lounge Julian had custom-built for the space, large enough for two. Leo alone looked lost in it. The new head of the detail saw Julian and approached, a stack of folders in his arms and a desperate plea in his eyes. Julian waved him off, and the agent dismissed the entire staff. Leo watched him approach, a cool challenge in his eyes. Julian placed the box of macarons on the table beside him and sat on the floor. He lifted Leo's bare feet into his lap. They were ice cold. He began to rub them, his gaze lifting to meet Leo's. The chill in Leo's expression began to thaw. Julian squeezed the sole of his foot, a playful, chiding gesture. In response, Leo petulantly knocked a stack of books off the end table. Julian glanced toward the door, then continued his ministrations, playing his part. The staff change was Eleanor's doing, a clear to Leo that her people were everywhere. No wonder he was so angry. Julian spoke softly, telling him he'd brought the pistachio macarons he liked. Leo picked one from the box and ate it slowly. When his feet were warm, he pressed one against Julian's chin. His voice was low, almost a whisper, when he called him Jules and asked for his help. Hearing the old childhood nickname after so many years was startling. Julian nodded. He told him he would help. Then he leaned forward, his hands finding Leo's waist. The whispers in Washington were predictable. Julian was a power-hungry puppeteer controlling a weak, young president. In truth, the power was a gift from Leo, a weapon to be wielded against their common enemy, Eleanor. Her ambition was transparent. But Leo had been quietly dismantling her network for years, funneling the reclaimed influence to Julian. To the world, Leo was a puppet. In reality, he was the one pulling all the strings. The next morning, his investigator brought news. The story about a financial scandal involving Secretary Albright had been leaked. It was tied to his daughter's exorbitant lifestyle and traced back to a slush fund managed by Eleanor's chief of staff. Julian smiled. His return gift had been delivered. The pushback was swift. Suddenly, all talk of the Albright scandal vanished, replaced by a media blitz about the need for the young, unmarried president to find a first lady. Eleanor was putting on a show of concern for the continuity of the presidential line, but Julian knew it was a maneuver to isolate Leo. He went to her. He found her in her immaculate study, waiting for him. She already knew about him and Leo. The risk of exposing a gay president was too great. She wouldn't dare leak it. This was her only remaining weapon. He told her he'd heard she was playing matchmaker for the president. She smiled, a perfect political mask, and said it was time for Leo to marry. She asked if Julian had any suitable candidates in mind. He did, he replied with a serene smile. He suggested himself. Eleanor's face hardened. She reminded him that he was a man. Julian shrugged, stating that precedents were made to be broken. Her composure finally snapped, and she slammed her hand on the desk, hissing that he was insane. The president needed to produce an heir. Julian's expression was unreadable as he informed her that he was well aware of who had drugged him at the state dinner, and that he had evidence proving her direct involvement in a plot to incapacitate a senior federal advisor. He asked if she would like to see that evidence made public. The color drained from her face. She told him the search for a first lady was canceled. That night, a dark figure slipped into the president's bedroom. Leo's voice, husky with sleep, came from the bed. He asked when Jules had taken up burglary. Julian slid under the covers, pulling Leo's warm body against his. He buried his face in Leo's neck and told him that Eleanor was about to make her move. Leo just hummed in sleepy acknowledgement. Days later, news broke that General Davies, Eleanor's brother and her strongest political ally, had been critically injured in a supposed training accident overseas. Their sources, however, told a different story. Davies was not injured. He was on his way back to D.C. with a unit of loyal soldiers traveling incognito. The feigned weakness was a classic misdirection. Eleanor was getting desperate. The night was quiet when they came. One team surrounded Julian's home, a diversion. The main force, led by Davies himself, breached the White House perimeter, where the security had been mysteriously reduced. They found Leo in the Oval Office waiting. He stood in a simple white shirt, appearing fragile and alone. Eleanor and Davies stood before him. Leo asked his stepmother what this was. She stated calmly that it was a coup. Leo's eyes moved from her to the general. He wondered aloud which of them wanted the chair. He recalled his mother telling him that Eleanor had a brother who adored her, who had been devastated when she was married off to the former president for political gain. He mused that this fraternal devotion seemed exceptionally strong. Eleanor went pale. Davies raised his weapon, its tip aimed at Leo's throat, and told him to be silent. Leo ignored him, looking at Eleanor. He asked her if she thought that after Davies became president, he would make his predecessor's wife his queen. He questioned how the public would react to that, to a leader marrying his own sister, even an adopted one. He pointed out that power was a colder bedfellow than love. Eleanor Vance knew he was right. She had been a pawn her entire life. Rescued from obscurity by Davies, she was molded, educated, and finally inserted into the world of power. Her affection had curdled into duty, then into resentment. She looked at Davies, the man she once loved, now a stranger obsessed with the power she had cultivated for him. She understood that if he succeeded, she would be discarded. Her debt was paid. Her eyes, when they met Davies, were clear and calm. Before Davies could react, the doors to the Oval Office burst open. Julian stood there, flanked by loyal Secret Service agents. The coup was over before it began. Leo picked up the general's fallen weapon. He looked at Davies and said quietly that his father had entrusted him to Julian's family, and soon after, Julian's father was ruined in a political scandal. He asked if that had been Davies' handiwork as well. Eleanor nodded silently. It was. Leo raised the weapon. The transfer of power was seamless and silent. By morning, all traces of the attempted coup were gone. The official story was that General Davies had died from his injuries abroad, and Eleanor Vance had retired from public life due to poor health. All authority flowed back to the president. Later, in the quiet of the Oval Office, Leo sat across from Julian. He asked him, half serious, if he would be his vice president. Julian looked at him, his expression softening. He said no. Leo's face fell. Julian reached across the desk and took his hand. He explained that a king and his queen both sat on thrones, visible to all. But he was a blade in the dark, a shield. His place was beside Leo, unseen, where he could be most effective. Leo looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. He understood. The next day, he announced he would not be seeking a partner, instead dedicating his presidency to fulfilling his father's ambitious foreign policy goals. He also took on a promising young intern from a disadvantaged background, placing him under Julian's direct mentorship. And in the evenings, the staff of the White House residence grew accustomed to the scent of buttermilk biscuits baking in the private kitchen, where the president's most trusted advisor made sure that, under his watch, Leo was finally putting on some weight.